Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Jess Marshall podcast. This week, I'm super stoked to have on the great Dave Barnett of Fox Sports Southwest and ESPN fame. Dave is a prolific local sportscaster. He's also a fellow North Texas graduate, and we're going to discuss everything from seizing on opportunity to fighting through adversity to doing what you love to mentorship, everything in between. I hope you enjoy the podcast. I think you will. I know it's a time outlay, but I also know that a lot of people want to hear your story too. I got a ton of friends who were RTVF majors at North Texas when I was at North Texas.
When were you there?
I graduated in 2003.
Okay.
So I started out up there on the football team, and then coach got fired, and I was running stairs at Fouts, and I looked down and I see these dudes. They're all just mowing each other down, no lights on, no nothing. I'm like, what's going on down there? Randall's ended up being the rugby team.
It was a rugby team.
I discovered rugby, and the rest was history for me.
Wow.
I
Club team, I guess.
I quit football. Yeah, it's not interscholastic, but no scholarships. Although the alumni, we all put together a scholarship fund for new guys. But yeah, man, it was so different. I mean, there are parts of it that are like football, but actually it's better when we bring players over who never played football. Like basketball players are some of the best. Soccer players are pretty good. Lacrosse players. Football, you learn so many bad habits from just how you tackle, just everything. But yeah, man, that was so. Yeah, North Texas rugby it's in my blood. My brother's one of the coaches up there now for the club team.
Really?
They didn't get a season this year, unfortunately. As we both know, North Texas is a tad to the liberal side of things. UNT, just the school is, so they didn't let the kids play. They let them play football and everything else and basketball and go mean green in March Madness, but they wouldn't let us play. So all those seniors, we got them into men's clubs teams, and they're playing for different men's clubs. But yeah, man. When did you graduate North Texas?
79.
79. What did you major in?
Radio TV.
Yeah. Have you wanted to be we're live right now, just so you know.
Oh, we're going. Okay.
We're good.
This is the show. All right.
You can put on that famous Dave Barnett voice now, if you
It'll
want.
sound just like this.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. Did you, growing up from an early age, did you want to be a sportscaster?
When I was 8, my father he was like a regional executive of the Presbyterian Church, and one of his duties was put on week-long programs during the summer at Trinity University in San Antonio, which was a Presbyterian school. So one of them involved families. So this was the June after I'd turned 8, and so we drove down there, got settled into the dorm, and I found some kids to run around the campus, and it started raining. And, of course, I didn't come in. So we ran around in the rain, and the next morning I woke up with a severe case of tonsillitis. So everybody else was going to do their thing and, programs and fun, and I was stuck with a babysitter in the dorm room.
Dang it.
And there was no TV, there was nothing to read, but somehow my dad thought to put his little black transistor radio, which is the size of an iPhone, in his suitcase, and that was my entertainment. It turned out for the whole week because I was not able to go. I wasn't cleared medically, so I just sat in that dorm room all week. So I flipped around during the day, and I found a great top 40 station. And to this day, I can recite word for word the songs that were in the top 40 that week. But awesome. Then they had to cut power back at night. So I flipped around again and found an Astro game. At this point, I had played 1 year of pee-wee baseball. But I'm not, a fanatic or anything. It's just what every kid did. So, and I had not followed baseball at all. I hadn't really followed anything but the football games that my dad would watch. So here's a baseball game, which I've never heard of. And I listened to it. And the Astrodome was in its second year. And I remember how descriptive Gene Elston and Lowell Pass were in describing the world's first dome stadium, the eighth wonder of the world.
Yeah.
So I'm getting this, this great impression of what a Major League Baseball game indoors is like. And I'm starting to hear the same names again. And, okay, well, that's their batting order. And Joe Morgan is their second baseman and Jim Wynn is their center fielder. So I'm basically listening just to fill time, but I'm also getting into it.
Sure.
And they're talking about they're going to be doing the same thing the next night. And so the next day, same thing, listen to music, find the Astro game, and it's game 2 of this series with the St. Louis Cardinals. So at this point, my little 8-year-old brain is starting to put this together. Okay, these are the same men who were on the radio last night. And now they're talking about they're going to do another game tomorrow night, and then they're going to go to Los Angeles, and there's going to be a series in Los Angeles with the Dodgers. This must be their job. Because they were there last night. This must be what they do.
Yeah.
So the next night, I put it all together. Okay, this is definitely their job. That must mean they get in free to the games. I hadn't quite made the leap that they get paid.
Yeah.
And pretty well. But they get in free to Major League Baseball games and talk about them. That's the greatest job in the world.
Sure.
I don't know why I didn't think being a player was the greatest job in the world.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that was the first indication that this must be my calling. That seemed like a better job than what Joe Morgan had.
Sure.
So we went home at the end of the week, and I'm already hooked. I'm an Astro fan. There's, KRLD carry the Astro games up here. And so I'm doing this now every night. I think I listened to every inning the rest of that 1966 season. So flip ahead about 30-some-odd years, and the first game I ever did with Joe Morgan at ESPN was in Los Angeles at Dodger Stadium. We go back to the hotel, and Joe wants to, get with the crew and have a drink. And so I decide I'm gonna freak Joe out. I think he's going to be impressed by this. And I tell him about how from age 8, I was night in, night out listening to every inning of every Astro game that year. And I named all 25 members of the Astros roster. And I named the starting lineup for the Cardinals. I couldn't name the entire roster. But I went position by position, and Joe got a really good chuckle out of it.
That's cool.
And he kept in touch with most of those teammates, so he's telling me, what they'd done with the rest of their lives. So for whatever reason, I mean, if I hadn't gotten tonsillitis that week, I, might be doing God knows what. But from that point on, it was just established in my brain that this has to be the greatest job in the world.
Yeah.
So there's not much an 8-year-old can do about that at that point. But I did start to pay attention when my dad would have a game on, not just to the game, but to the broadcasters. And, started to notice different approaches and who I thought did this well and who did that well. So I kind of had it in my mind that when I'm ready for a career, I don't even know if this is possible. It seems probably impossible, but I'm going to see if it's, in my capabilities to pursue a career in broadcasting. So all I could do at that point is, by the time I get to high school, write for the Denton High School paper, sports editor, and it's written journalism at that point. And I was thinking I might major in journalism because it just seemed like such an incredibly competitive field to go into broadcasting. And there were just more jobs available on the written side. Toward the end of my senior year, we went to the newspaper staff, and then I went to a workshop one day at UTA, and it was professional journalists, and there was a panel with writers on one side and broadcasters on the other, local newscasters and reporters. And all the writers were talking about their jobs with this heavy note of cynicism, and it's kind of like they didn't really necessarily enjoy their careers. It was just, so much that made their jobs difficult, whereas all the broadcasters talked about was how much they enjoyed it.
Wow.
So I was kind of on the fence, and at that point I was going to make my decision on what to major in based on where I thought my best chances of actually getting a job were. Well, after that workshop at UTA, I said, well, if it's 50-50, I got this idea originally because I wanted to be a broadcaster. So I'm going to major in it and see what happens.
Sure.
So, go to UNT. I gave myself 2 years. I thought if by the end of my sophomore year I can see a path to actually getting a job at some point, then I'm going to stay with this as a major. If it just seems, like the odds are just too difficult, no matter how good you are. There's so many breaks you have to have.
Yeah.
So if I don't really think it's realistic, then I thought, well, I'll change my major. And right about then, I'm telling my dad this, and he tells me something that he doesn't remember, or he didn't remember telling me this, but years later when I told him, he didn't remember, but he realized why he said what he said. And what he said was, no matter what field you're in, there's always room for the very best people. No matter how competitive it is, the people who are working the hardest, have the most ability, find a way to get exposure. And so that told me, well, give it another year at least. And by that point, I'm able to do some things on the campus radio station. I took the sports broadcasting class under Bill Mercer, who I had, he's one of the guys I studied once I decided this is what I wanted to do, because he was all over the place. He was sports anchor on Channel 4, radio voice of the Cowboys, and then the original radio voice of the Rangers, most famous for doing wrestling. And so now he's teaching, the 8 or 10 of us in this 0 credit hour class exactly how to do this. And there's enough opportunity for us to get on the air at KNTU that, I realize I can do this. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to do it, but if I get an opportunity, I won't embarrass myself. I know how to put on a reasonable semi-professional broadcast. The end of my junior year, I'm hearing a lot of classmates talk about they've got this internship lined up for the summer, back home wherever they're from, or this part-time job, and I got nothing lined up. And so it's really starting to weigh on me that in a year I'm going to have a degree, which is great, but everybody else is going to have a degree. Multiply that for all universities around the country, and no telling how many tens of thousands of people are also going to have a degree. So what's going to set me aside? So I had lined up a summer job that wasn't going to be in broadcasting, and I'd gone down to fill out the application and pull into the driveway, and the phone is ringing. And I race into the phone, and it's a professor, Dr. Clay Kistler, who I had a couple of classes with. And he says, what have you got lined up for the summer? And I said, well, I just accepted a job at Russell's department store for the summer. He says, well, I was at the Radio TV News Directors Convention this past weekend, and I met the new news director at KRLD. KRLD had just changed formats to become all news, the first all news station. And he said they have not hired everybody they're going to hire. They need somebody to do tape editing, writing. It's going to be minimum wage, but it's a job for the summer. And I told him about you, and he said, oh, well, have him give me a call. So that was the phone call. Okay, here, Ken Fairchild, call him up. And my head's kind of spinning. Like, it can't be this easy. I mean, to at least get my foot in the door. So I call him up. He said, yep, come on down. So I went down and met him the next day, and they were so desperate, I started the next day.
No kidding.
I had just turned 20, but they were desperate for bodies who could type, who could edit tape, and run to the post office, get a bag of mail that day, whatever it is that nobody else wanted to do. But I'm just turned 20, and I'm at one of the top AM radio stations in the country.
Yeah.
And I can't believe it. So at some point in that summer, Brad Sham, who had a talk show every night from 6 to 7:30, needed a producer for his talk show. He needed somebody to cover the things he couldn't get to, whether it was a Ranger game, get some tape afterwards, or whatever it might be. And I had let it be known that that was my ultimate career goal, is to do something like what Brad was doing. So by the end of the summer, I'm kind of half working for news and half working at sports for Brad. For my senior year, I was driving up every day after class and starting mid-afternoon and producing Brad's show and getting some tape after the show to feed down the line for the morning sports, which were anchored by the late Frank Gleber back then, who was well known for a long career he had at
Most
CBS.
definitely.
But he was also morning sports anchor at KRLD. So now I've got Frank and Brad using me wherever they can. I mean, to them, it's he'll go cover this.
Sure.
And I don't really want to, or I can't, but now, we've got an extra pair of legs. So that was kind of how things were headed throughout my senior year. So I graduate, and they created a midday sports position for me to do 15 to 45, do a little 3-minute sportscast, and produce Brad's show. So at this point, I'm barely 21, and I'm already working full-time at one of the top AM stations in the country.
Amazing.
So if I hadn't had 8-year-old case of tonsillitis, God knows.
When doors start to open for you, though, are you thinking to yourself, well, maybe this is my calling? If, I bet I went all in, I bet on myself, I stuck with something that I knew that I wanted to do, not, going the journalism route, but staying in the broadcasting lane. When that first door opened for you, did you have the wherewithal or the perspective to say to yourself, wow, this is a big opportunity? Well, you said you thought to yourself, is everything this easy? Could it really be this easy? I mean, were you kind of amazed for the first 6 months you were there of the doors that kept opening for you?
Yeah. I could not have had better timing. And that's something that I try to tell students is the career I've had involves some ability and a lot of hard work, but an awful lot of great timing that you just, you can't plan on. The only thing you can plan on is if you get the kind of opportunities that I was getting, to be prepared to take advantage of them.
Sure.
And so that was kind of always in the back of my head. Not that I would actually get a chance to, do NBA play-by-play at age 23, which is what happened after I'd been at KRLD for 3 years. And the Rangers had hired Mark Holtz away from the Mavericks after the first Mavericks season. This happened just a few weeks before the second season was about to start. And so there was no time for the Mavericks to do a nationwide search. They were pretty much limited to people in the market who had done basketball and were not contractually tied down to a station. Well, that turned out to be me. They probably would have gone for Brad, but Brad was under contract at KRLD. He and Vern Lundquist are doing Cowboys radio, and so that plus the talk show, and Brad was a valuable commodity at KRLD, and I was useful, but I way too unimportant to have a contract. So I was available. I had done enough basketball at KNTU and a couple of games filling in for Brad. KRLD had the SMU basketball contract back then. So a couple of SMU games Brad could make, one at Vanderbilt, one at home against Houston. And so I had big-time college basketball, a recent tape, and given the time constraints, that was enough for the Mavericks to at least try a year with me at the helm at age 23.
Wow, calling play-by-play.
Calling play-by-play.
Who was your color analyst?
On the road games, I was solo. Home games, Alan Stone, who had been sports anchor at Channel 4 and then went full-time into media relations when the Mavericks started up. And he also did some TV play-by-play. And so he was, full-time media relations, but also did some of the broadcasting. He didn't do all the radio. He did home radio color. So that was a two-man show, one-man show on the road. That entire year, I spent trying to catch up to the speed of the NBA. What I quickly realized is I need to figure out a way to describe something in 3 or 4 words where I have been taking 10 or 12 words.
Gotcha.
Because you do that and you're never caught up to the ball. You're always chasing the ball, and then people are listening and hearing a crowd react to a shot that went in, but I'm still 2 passes behind because I'm being too descriptive. So that it really did take me pretty much that entire first year to where I felt like I could stay with the pace of, a Magic Johnson-led fast break, and the pace of the NBA was torrid back then.
Yeah.
So I was good enough after the first year to get another year.
Nice.
And that turned into 7 years. And at the end of the 7th year, one of the people who had been in marketing for the Mavericks took over the entire business operations with the Spurs, Russ Bookbinder. And so he made me an offer to go down to San Antonio. And it shocked most people because that was a move down in markets, but it was at least parallel in terms of quality of the team. The Spurs had just drafted David Robinson, who was still doing his 2 years in the Navy. So my first year, they were still terrible, but then David became the center of the second year, and from that point on, Spurs have been champions or contenders. So trace it all back to taking advantage of wherever the opportunity was while I was in school. And then this is what I tell students: if you get an incredible amount of luck the way I did, then you can put your best foot forward and show people what you're capable of. And if everything falls into place, then you can have the type of career I've had.
Yeah.
But it's at least as much about timing and taking advantage of timing as it is whatever abilities I have.
Sure. What is your favorite sport to call? Do you have a favorite? Obviously,
my
cut
standard
your teeth on baseball.
Yeah, my standard answer is, and it's sincere, is whatever's in season.
Really?
If it's this time of year, well, it's either NBA playoffs. There's nothing better than a great NBA playoff series, or baseball. But if it's the fall, nothing I'd rather do than football. So if I have one last broadcast in me, I'll probably pick a big-time college football game.
Okay. That's your death row, like your death row meal?
If this is going to be it for me, if this is going to be it for me, then I've done one Rose Bowl. Let me do another Rose Bowl.
Yeah? What's the biggest game you've ever called?
The 2010 World Series.
Okay.
Because I was still doing radio with Rangers with Eric Nadel. So, that's what every kid dreams of. The next year, I was doing just television, so I didn't call the 2011 World Series. But World Series, I did one Rose Bowl for ESPN Radio. I did
Was Keith Jackson doing the TV in that game?
He did, I believe.
Yeah.
Do
Oh, Nelly.
I think he probably was doing the TV.
Cool.
But it was Rodney Gilmore and Aaron Andrews and me on the radio.
Oh, right on.
It wasn't a great game. It was USC and Illinois. You know, it was not a great game, but it's the Rose Bowl.
Gilmore's very solid. He's very solid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's hard to beat a Rose Bowl, you know, for college football. Basketball, I did the 1986 NBA All-Star Game, back when the players took pride in the All-Star Game.
Way back then.
When they played harder on defense, really, than they did during a regular season game. The first 6 minutes of that NBA All-Star Game, to this day, I think, is the highest level basketball can be played. It's Hall of Famers against Hall of Famers.
Who are we talking about
going
here?
at each other, and they're trying to embarrass each other.
That's awesome.
It's completely different than what it is.
So
Kareem, Moses Malone, Dr. J, Larry Bird, Magic, Isaiah Thomas was MVP of that game. I looked at the rosters not long ago, and it's mostly future Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
And
That's
a
awesome.
bunch of guys that made the 50th anniversary of the NBA, they put out a list of the 50 greatest players of all time, and a bunch of those guys are on there. And going at it, you know.
Slapping the floor, bring it on, let's go. Yeah.
Ralph Sampson had some of the best block shots to this day I've ever seen.
How cool.
In an NBA All-Star game.
Yeah.
Now no one tries to block a shot.
No. Do you ever look around when you're in one of those big-time settings and just go, pinching yourself, going, I can't believe I'm here?
All the time back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would do a full season of TV, college football for ESPN, but then when the bowls came around, I might do the telecast, but I might be assigned to do the radio. And, you know, the traditional New Year's bowls were the ones where I enjoyed getting a chance to do the radio. So that was the one Rose Bowl. I did 4 Orange Bowls, 2 Fiesta Bowls, and a Sugar Bowl. So these are the games, you know, little 10-year-old me would try and stay up late and watch. And now I'm doing them. So, yeah, I think anybody who's ever gotten that opportunity would tell you the same thing. You're always pinching yourself.
No doubt.
I'm here. How did this happen? I can't believe this.
So your first big-time gig was Mavericks, and then you jumped to the Spurs. And then did ESPN come calling after you were done with the Spurs?
I was also doing the Southwest Conference Game of the Week.
Okay.
That started 1989 all the way through the end of the Southwest Conference. I kind of presided over the death of the Southwest Conference.
Didn't they do the Southwest Conference tournament always at Reunion? Or a lot of times? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So as the Southwest Conference is going through its final football season, which is 1995, the commissioner of the WAC, Carl Benson, is showing up at a lot of Southwest Conference games because he's thinking, how many of these teams can I get into an expanded version of the WAC? This was before the Big 12 had come together, and, you know, half Southwest Conference was involved with that and half weren't. So one of these games, Carl Benson comes up to me and he says, you know, you should contact ESPN because they're about to start a second network. And ESPN2 is going to have a lot of college football. At this point, ESPN, I think, only had 2 games. There was an early Big Ten window, which Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson were doing.
Okay.
And then there was the primetime game, which Ron Franklin and Mike Gottfried were doing. It says they're going to add a whole other network and more games. And since this is going away, you should see, you know, what's going on with ESPN. So here again, this is like timing straight from heaven. There was in the 7 years I did the Southwest Conference Game of the Week, there was 1 week where there was no game. And it was because every school had the option to pass on 1 week. If they didn't, for whatever reason, didn't want their home game to be televised, then they could pass. So November of 1995, everybody passes. So there is no Southwest Conference Game of the Week that week.
Why?
Well, because the league is winding down, and I don't remember the particulars, but even Rice passed on. I mean, Rice, didn't usually look down their nose at any home telecast, but they wanted to protect their gate or whatever. So that one weekend, ESPN asked if I'm available to do a game. ESPN2 was on the air, and they were doing just a handful of games just to kind of establish this is the new network, and we're going to have a college football package. So they asked if I was available for Ohio State at Minnesota. And any other week, those 7 years, I would have had to say no. That was the 1 week where I could say, yeah, I'm available. So went up and did that one game, and kind of based on that, I a few months later got a full-time offer to do all three of my sports, football, basketball, baseball, for ESPN and ESPN2. So again, perfect timing. My college sports were about to go away. Well, here's a step up. And I wasn't looking to leave the Spurs. I loved everything about working for them in San Antonio. But the offer from ESPN was so extensive, I think it was 85 events, that it would have been almost impossible to also do Spurs. There would have been so many conflicts that I kind of had to choose. And also, back then, there was a real rivalry between ESPN and Fox. And the Spurs games were on Fox Southwest. So ESPN was kind of demanding, if you're going to come with us, then you can't also do games with Fox. Now, that's so not the case now. Now networks don't care. I mean, Bill Raftery does, games for every network there is, Fox and CBS.
Yeah.
And they just don't care now. But back then it was a big deal.
Huh.
So, I mean, here is the type offer that as soon as I realized what this business was, it's like I can't imagine anything better than full-time, 4 years, doing all three of my sports, 85-plus events. And so, there's nothing I didn't like about the Spurs, but if I was going to keep doing the Spurs, then I would have to figure out another way to do football and baseball. And I wasn't going to get anything better than what ESPN had on the table.
85 is a lot. I mean, that's approaching 2 a week.
Yeah, and my typical week for college basketball was a Conference USA was brand new, so I think they had a Monday night package or Sunday night package, and then my main assignments were Super Tuesday Big Ten games. So I would do, a game at Tulane or whatever on a Sunday, and then get to a Big Ten game on a Tuesday, and then maybe another Big Ten game on a Thursday, or something random, maybe Big 12 or SEC. So it was at least 3 basketball games, and it would have been really hard to also try and fit in as many Spurs games as possible.
Yeah, for sure. The travel schedule, was it exciting at first, and then did it start to wear on you after a while?
At this point, NBA teams were chartering, and it was a little bit jarring to go back to full commercial travel.
I bet.
And so, I wouldn't say that there was much excitement involved in the travel at this point, with the exception of I made it be known that any game in Hawaii, I was going to raise my hand.
There you go.
Even if it was coach.
Yeah.
So there were, I never got tired of any trip to, the New York metro area, L.A., Honolulu, Maui. But my kids at this point were, my son was 8, my daughter was 5 when I started with ESPN. And so it was kind of the opposite. It was, man, this is, the greatest job ever, but it's a lot of time away from them.
Sure.
And so that became something that, we navigated as well as I could, and tried to include them as much as I could, bowl trips or whatever. So I tried to give them as many of the benefits of my position as I could, sort of making up as best I could for all the time that I wasn't there.
I got you. Yeah, there's definitely that's a hard balance to strike, right? Especially when you're operating at a high level, right? You're in the top 1% of the people who are in your profession. You're doing what you always wanted to do, but yeah, raising that family is important as well. As you were coming up the ranks, did you gravitate toward any specific people and consider them your mentors? And if you did, were you doing that knowingly, or do you look back and go, oh, at that time maybe Brad was my mentor for a while, or I was really watching what whoever was doing and I was trying to mimic them, or I was seeing what they did well and didn't do well and trying to learn from that?
As a kid, I was always doing that. I was always noticing who I thought did a good job as opposed to over here. And then I would try to analyze as much as a 12-year-old can. Well, why does he do this better? As far as mentors, really, the only two mentors I've had were Bill Mercer when I was in school and Brad once I was at KRLD. The challenge that every young broadcaster has is how to be influenced without mimicking. So if I'm influenced by people who I think are the best in the business, then it's more broad strokes. Where do I notice their preparation? How do they slip in great tidbits? Why did they wait until this point of the game to tell that story? So it's finer points like that. I think when everybody's starting out, before they develop their own sound and get used to what their voice sounds like and bring in their own personality, at some point everybody sort of is mimicking. I would catch myself using some of the same phrases that Brad would use. But you have to get away from that because the audience can tell. And so it's something that it takes a while, and it takes, like anything else, it takes reps before you really have a handle on how you sound, and you can still refer back to the influences of the very best people, that you always studied, and you could tell that you would like to be as good at them without sounding like them.
Yeah.
And you just have to do it. You have to do it over and over and over. And then at some point you realize, okay, that's how I say that, and nobody else does. So, that's how you kind of develop your own sound.
Your little, almost your trademark, like Mike Breen, who says bang every time there's a three-pointer, kind of that type. Or, I grew up in the Northwest, so listening to Mariners games growing up. So Dave Niehaus was the play-by-play guy there, and I have always wondered why. I always wanted to be the guy on the field, but then I wondered why, as I could see my athletic career winding down, why I didn't gravitate toward and chase the broadcasting thing. And I think it was just because I was then a little older and looking at the money, and so ended up going the business route instead. But I much prefer to take in a game on the radio than I do to watch it, because I grew up listening to games. And Coop does this all the time. They're playing left to right on your radio dial, right? You're setting the stage for the listener.
Right.
Do you have any Brad? Do you have a good Brad Sham impersonation like Gordo on the ticket?
I have way too much respect for Brad.
Nobody watches this thing, so you want to unleash it. Why haven't we heard Gordo do a fake Dave Barnett on the ticket?
Well, I never wanted to have a catchphrase.
Yeah.
And there are people, some of the best ever are identified with catchphrases. But I think the best ones didn't sound like they were canned. I think they originally just came out naturally. Like I'm sure I never asked him this, but I'm pretty sure that Dick Enberg started saying, "Oh my," just because that was his sincere reaction to something that happened on the field. And then he became identified with it.
Yeah. You didn't want to have the canned Brent Nussberger, "You were looking live." Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day?
Oh, yeah. You know, and
that's when you knew it was a big game, right?
Well, yeah, and that's when he was hosting, the pregame show, the NFL Today, and so he would bounce from, and it was a big deal to go from the live shot in New York to the live shot in Chicago or Irving or whatever. So I don't know if he had in mind, I need to come up with a catchphrase. But a lot of them end up sounding, a little bit trite and forced. And so I always wanted to avoid that. And so, there were, I'm sure, certain descriptions I used that I would use on a consistent basis, but I never really wanted it to become a catchphrase because I just didn't want to come across as somebody who is shooting for that. All I was ever shooting for was describe the game as best as possible.
Yeah. I remember Dave Niehouse's was "Fly, Fly Away."
Yeah.
Remember every time there was a...
That's the other thing. All the good ones are taken. Harry Carey took a lot of the best ones.
Sure, for sure.
So, if you sit down and really think, okay, what would be a good catchphrase? Well, then it's already going to be canned and trite sounding and not sounding like it just came during the course of your description.
This is throwing me way back because I'm just remembering all those summer nights listening to Mariners games. And then I would always know school was almost out when the Sonics were normally losing in the playoffs. And that was Kevin Calabro for a long time.
Well, Bob Blackburn before that.
Yes, yeah. And
Wayne Coding.
Yeah, and those are just really great memories. I don't think kids listen to the radio. I know they don't listen to the radio the way I did, or even, that's how you found your calling, was the radio.
The only Astros telecasts were road Sunday games back then.
Gotcha.
And NBC had a game of the week, but it was a game of the week, way before each team had its own cable package. Because the thinking of pro franchises back then was, well, you're giving away the product if you televise home games.
Sure.
Which, turned out to be completely the opposite. No, you're advertising your product. And you're showing people how much fun it is to be there, and you're making them want to be there. Mm-hmm. But, that wasn't the case when I was a kid growing up. It's any game that's on TV. You're not going anywhere for those 2.5 or 3 hours, and you're soaking in every bit of it you can. So it was 95% radio when I'm listening to Gene Elston and Lowell Pass doing the Astros. And, those rare Sunday afternoon games, then that's where I noticed the difference in a radio call versus a TV call, because Gene didn't sound the way on TV as he did on the radio. I didn't realize at the time, but it's because you're not supposed to. It's completely different arts. For TV, you're not describing what people can already see. You're telling them what they can't see, or filling in some information, to enhance the story or whatever the situation may be, or the personal stories. That's something I didn't, learn to do until I was actually doing telecasts. First telecast I did for the Mavericks, that was the first TV play-by-play I'd done. And I was basically doing a radio call on TV, which is not what you want to do. So I had to kind of learn, again, how do you pull back from this many words to describe it to this many words, or not describe it at all, because people can see it. So what do people need to know that they can't see for themselves? That's kind of the art of TV. It's more like caption writing.
Sure.
than it is being as descriptive as you can be.
When you were when you first got into play-by-play for the Mavs, you said on the road you were doing dual duty, right? You're calling the play-by-play and you're filling in the color. Was that a baptism by fire, or did you have previous experience doing that on North Texas broadcasts?
No, we had partners, and we would switch off actually, and one of us would do play-by-play for the first half and one color, and then we'd switch.
Gotcha.
It wasn't really that hard to do a solo NBA game because it's all action. Completely different than baseball, where mostly what you're doing is filling in the non-action.
Mm-hmm.
Basketball, it's a matter of just trying to keep up with what's going on. I don't remember. The challenge was trying to get in as much material as there was to get in. So, it was better, and it's always more enjoyable to have a partner because you're doing a conversation. But it was not. I don't remember it being ever a situation where I'm sitting and calling the game, but in the back of my head going, "Oh man, I've already used all my material. What are we going to talk about in this blowout of the fourth quarter?" That never happened in an NBA game.
Gotcha. You mentioned that when you started at KRLD, they had made that shift to full-time news, which was kind of a paradigm shift in in just the radio business. What was WBAP doing at that time?
Country.
Yeah.
And then when they got the Rangers and the Mavericks, I don't remember exactly when they got the Rangers away from KRLD, but that's when they had established themselves as We Also Do Sports. And then 1980, they also got the Mavericks games. And so they were country during the day. They became known as a destination for play-by-play. And then my second or third year then would have been about 82 or 83. They added a sports talk show, kind of to compete with Brad, but also as a lead-in to whatever the game was going to be. So it became pregame Ranger talk or pregame Maverick talk, and then they made it non-seasonal. We're always going to have this show. We call it Sports at 6. And that's kind of where the industry was going back then, because music had carved out the FM side of the dial, because AM just can't compete with the sound of stereo FM.
Right.
So it became pretty apparent that the way AM was going to survive was in news and talk and information. I'm sure WBAP was one of the last AM stations still playing country music and in good ratings doing country music. And now they, for a number of decades have been what they are now, which is news and talk during the day. And, until recently they had Dallas Stars.
Yeah.
So, that was starting to become the industry norm even back then in the early 80s.
When you heard the concept that Mike Reiner was throwing around for the ticket, did you think that's going to work?
Yes.
Or did you really?
Yes, because
a lot of people
Mike,
didn't.
Well, I'd known him. In fact, he had worked with me for a while at WBAP.
Yeah.
And the concept had already been tried and succeeded around the country, WFAN in New York. And it was an immediate success there. And so other markets were going with it. And not only was I not surprised that it worked here, the only question was, why hasn't anyone already tried it here? I mean, how many more sports crazy markets are there than Dallas-Fort Worth?
Not many. Are you surprised by how popular that station got and has remained?
I'm really not. Again, because I've known Mike. And he and I have talked about this because I asked him once where it dawned on him that what could distinguish the ticket wasn't how much hardcore sports they talked, how deeply they could dive into X's and O's. What distinguished them was the non-sports stuff, just, talking with each other the way they do off the air. And the way Mike was on the air is exactly who he is off the air. And that's his secret. So I asked him, when did it dawn on you that was where you were going to, distinguish the sound of the ticket? Because it wasn't always going to be about, who's going to start at quarterback. It's going to be what happened this weekend, or, this was a great movie, or whatever. And it was, while he and I, actually, this was in the early 80s, we would watch Ranger games in the old blue press box at Arlington Stadium, which was built to be the football press box for UTA right as UTA was about to drop football. They played a season or two at Arlington Stadium, and that was the football press box. The first game, I was assigned by Brad Sham to get some interviews and get some tape after the game and bring it back to the station. I only knew of one press box. So I went to the press box behind home plate, and Randy Galloway was the chapter chairman of the Baseball Writers Association of America. And he noticed this kid walking in with a tape recorder, looking around like he had no idea where he was supposed to sit. So in a very firm but polite manner, Randy came up to him, and I'd never met him before. He had no idea who I was, and explained to me that you radio TV types go to that box.
Old Randy.
That's where you're sentenced to watch this game. So I went down there, and sure enough, there were a couple other people from radio stations. Well, then once I'm working at WBAP for the off Maverick season, I was the pre- and post-game host of Ranger talk shows. And I would watch the game in the blue box. So it was a room about this size.
Yeah.
So it's usually me. It's usually Reiner. It was usually Chris Arnold, who was working for K104 back then. Whoever was covering it for the TV stations. And we would sit and talk about anything under the sun. It might have something to do with the game. It might not. It might be baseball related, but it might be Reiner talking about, the great Yankees lineup of 1961 or whatever it might be. Could go off in any direction.
That's cool.
And these are, very entertaining people, and so we knew each other off the air, and so we're just friends, getting paid to hang out with each other. And so at one point, Mike says he noticed that people who were working in the offices, that's also where the Ranger offices were, he noticed that they would start coming out of their offices and stick their head in the box where all the radio guys were, because they were caught up in whatever the story was. And that started to happen on a regular basis. And so that's when Mike realized, we've got something here. Everybody thinks the ticket's going to fail because we don't have a Major League franchise, for the games. Well, here's what we do have. We're going to have the kind of conversation that people will be interested in listening to just for entertainment value, because that was already happening, on a very microscopic level. Well, that, as all these decades later, turned into what still distinguishes the ticket and still what sets it apart from any other all-sports station. Lots of imitators, but what they don't have is the personalities that Mike gathered. And he knew who he wanted for that original staff because they were in that box with him. And they were already having these kind of conversations that he knew would translate into a show. So he already knew he wanted Greg Williams to be his partner. He already knew young George Dunham and young Craig Miller, because they're doing the same job I had, working for Brad at KRLD.
Was it Menifee, Kurt Menifee, part of the,
Yeah, I think he was one of them.
the first generation over there?
So,
and all of our buddies, Skip Bayless, too?
No, because he was a columnist before he ever went in. So, yeah, I mean, he would be in the regular, the writer's box. But, he conceived of this long before he finally got the backing to create a radio station. But as long as he was there, all it was, what he was already doing all those long nights watching terrible Ranger games and just trying to entertain each other for 3 hours. And when he noticed other people who, weren't in broadcasting, but were likely to be the type people who would listen, and they were really into it. And they were laughing down the hallway, and they were being entertained. And so the only question was, who can I finally convince to back this thing financially? And, once he got that put together, then the rest is history.
Yeah. You mentioned, about 45 minutes ago, that when you talk to students and you give them advice, you tell them to stay ready, and that way they can leverage their opportunities. Do you go back to North Texas and talk to students and teach and stuff?
Yeah, because that class still exists, the sports broadcasting class.
0 credit hours still?
No, I think it's 2.
Yeah,
I think it's 2 now. It's taught by the guy who's been my partner on the broadcast, Hank Dickinson.
Yeah, Hank, man.
And it's mostly guest speakers like myself. So
cool.
Every semester, I'll come back, and that's a point I always make. I age 19, 20, sitting right there where you are now probably thinking the same thoughts. Well, how am I ever going to get a chance? If I do get an opportunity, then what? And all I had in my power back then is the same thing they have in their power now, which is do everything they can to be as prepared as they can.
Sure. Do any of those students gravitate toward you and call you a mentor? Do you actively mentor any young broadcasters? Like, hey, Dave, will you watch my game tonight and hit me with some pointers?
Every once in a while, you'll get that. The only person who's ever actually later on told me that I really was a mentor to them, I didn't realize that I was filling that function. I was just trying to tell them what I knew. And it was Brian Anderson of Milwaukee Brewers and Turner and CBS. In San Antonio, he was one of the camera people for the in-house broadcasts that went up on the Jumbotron. The Spurs had the first Jumbotron video board.
Is that right?
And he was one of the camera guys. And then he also did the minor league team, the AA San Antonio Missions. He did Missions Radio. And so I didn't realize at the time that I was apparently as much of an influence on Brian as I turned out to be, but he has since been incredibly generous in giving me credit for, mentoring him through those early days. And so, that's really good to hear, because look how he's turned out. I mean, I think he would have been great. I think he would have been great anyway.
Yeah.
But the only way to have that kind of influence is to be around them more than just once a semester. You really have to follow the development of their skills, and if they ask, then make a suggestion here or a suggestion there. It's kind of hard to do just swooping in. I've always had the policy that any chance I get to help a young broadcaster, I'm going to do it if it's within my power. So you never know how much influence you might be having. I mean, there are people who said one thing to me when I was starting out, and it's still up there. So they didn't know at the time that it was influential, but you just don't know that. Yeah. You just try and, put forth the best information you can.
Sure. Were there ever jobs or opportunities that maybe you did an interview for or did like a rehearsal for that you didn't get, that you were like, man, that bums me out? Like that whole facing rejection thing. Lots of people who are in different types of art get rejected a lot. I've had artists on here. I've had authors. One gal said her first book, so she just got published like last year, right before COVID, and it was supposed to go on a book tour, and that all got canceled. But her book before that went through like 12 rewrites, and the editor still wouldn't publish it, and she finally shelved it and started a new one. And I asked her about rejection. She said, hold on. And she had brought a rejection letter with her, and she read it. Was that rejection piece? Was that something that you were able to just kind of roll with the punches, or were there some that kind of hit you and stung you a little bit?
Well, again, I've been so fortunate that the jobs that I got, I really didn't have to pursue because they came to me as offers. I was offered the Spurs job. I wouldn't necessarily have gone after it because Dallas is a bigger market. I'm from here. But, once it was presented to me as a possibility, the more I looked into it, I decided, this is mostly because it was going to be mostly TV. My first year down there was the last year they did simulcasts. And we talked about doing a one-man show. Well, I was a one-man show doing a radio broadcast and the television simulcast. So that's a whole different art. You're kind of doing 25% more talking than you would for a normal telecast, 25% less than you would for a radio broadcast.
Interesting.
My second year is when they split, and this is what man who hired me, Russ Bookbinder, had in mind, is when the contracts came up, he wanted to split and have separate radio and TV broadcasts. So I did the television, and that was the main reason I wanted to go down there, is because as much as I liked doing Mavericks Radio, the way the business was going was toward TV. Not every game was televised the way it is now, but enough were that that's where the audience was heading. So then the ESPN opportunity came up, and I pursued that, and I had a good agent that helped as well. But the only job that I pursued that I didn't get in this era was after my first year with the Spurs, and the owner, Red McCombs, was not a big fan of me. I didn't realize at the time.
Really?
Well, because now I look back and I realized that all I was doing was giving him bad news. Because the team was 21-61. Yeah. And I had been taught, not to be a homer and not to pretend that every one of those 61 losses was the fault of the referees. I'm trying to respect the audience and the fans and, do a down the middle call. And Red, it turns out, wanted more of a homer call. So the end of that year, I found out, Red's not sure he wants to bring you back for year two.
Huh.
The Orlando Magic were starting up then. And so I got an interview with the Magic. And along this time, I got the award for best play-by-play broadcast in Texas. It wasn't from that first year with the Spurs. It was from the previous year, a Mavericks game I'd done, a Mavericks-Celtics game. And so I found out I won that award, and that was enough to convince Red McCombs to bring me back. It wouldn't look good to fire a guy who just got named best broadcast.
Yeah, that would not look good, man.
So as it turns out, I didn't get the offer from Orlando. Chip Carey did, but I didn't need it because I was able to squeak myself into another year with the Spurs. Well, that was the year David Robinson arrived, Sean Elliott in the draft, Terry Cummings in a trade, and that year produced the biggest one-season turnaround in NBA history.
Wow.
From 21 wins to 56 wins.
Crazy.
And Red thought I was doing a great job. Because all I was doing was giving him good news.
Yeah.
And from that point on, we were fine. So I went after the Orlando job thinking I really needed it. And the fact that I didn't get it turned out to be, not a disaster. I think the year after that, I got an opportunity to audition with Craig James for ESPN. And it was, they flew us up to New York, put us in the studio, and had us call the previous year's LSU Florida game, which ESPN had televised. So they put that telecast up and had Craig and I sit there and do the game. So, I prepared for it the way I would have any other game, as if it was live. And they hired Craig immediately and put him on game day. And they did not hire me. So I was a little bummed at the time, because at this point I'm into my early 30s. And, I have in the back of my head, well, I really at some point would like to work for a network. I didn't know it was going to be full-time, 3 sports, but at some point I would like for my work to be seen as network quality. So it was disappointing not to get that. It turned out to be 4 years later that I did get the full-time offer. But that timing was just fine, because, if I'd gone immediately to ESPN, it would have been different. They didn't have ESPN2 yet. It would have been harder to break through. And I would have missed great seasons of Spurs basketball. So at the time, that was disappointing. I didn't know if I'd get another opportunity. I think ESPN saw at the time that I really, could use a few more years of getting used to doing a TV call. I think even then, probably my TV call was a little too verbose. And by the time the full-time offer came in, I kind of had down, this is how I sound doing TV as opposed to radio.
Gotcha.
So even that timing turned out to be just ideal.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. What's the protocol when you travel to an event, or to a game site, and you're getting ready for this game? Say you just called, you said you'd maybe have a Big Ten game on a Tuesday night. And coming off the heels of another game in another league, are you, as soon as preceding game is done, boom, preparing for the next game, learning rosters, reading stats, getting completely, integrated into I need all this up here so that I can sound and fit the bill on Tuesday night? And then when you arrive, are you meeting your broadcast partner? Are you guys pre-gaming? How does that work? What's the behind the scenes there?
Back before you could get anything you wanted off the internet, you kind of had to wait until you got into town and got the printed materials from the sports information department. Whereas now, you can be preparing 24/7 for any event. That's something else that I tell students is, there's never an excuse for not having enough information to prepare, because everything is always there all the time. Well, it wasn't the case back then. So in the era we're talking about, if I had, a Sunday night game in, at Tulane or whatever, I would probably have gotten what I needed to start preparing late the previous week. So I would try to have everything that was available before I got to town, and then if we're still waiting, on updated stats or game notes or whatever, then you plug them in there. But I never wanted to start from scratch every single game.
Sure.
I always wanted to have as much done before I got into town as it was physically possible to do. And then you get into town, and depending on when everybody else arrived, you might have dinner with the producer director or your partner, and then usually for basketball, the next day you'd go to the shoot-around practices for both teams, talk to coaches, talk to a player or two. By then you have all the updated information you're going to need. Go back to the room, plug in whatever, I needed. And then by the time I would get there at, say 5:30 for a 7:30 game or whatever, I wanted everything ready to go. And then if I would talk to a player or a coach on the floor before the game, it was just supplemental. It was updating an injury or, whatever was still fresh enough that it hadn't been in the paper that morning, but it was going to be pertinent information for that game. So as much prep as I can do before I get there, that's what I want to do.
I got you. What's the weirdest, most off-the-wall, oddball event you've called? Or, if there's not one of those, was there a game where a player went up in the stands or like Bobby Knight threw his chair across the court? Was there something that sticks out in your mind as just like kind of surreal?
Yeah, it wasn't a game. It was the shoot-around, and it was a Bobby Knight shoot-around.
Ah.
Indiana, believe it or not, I've turned off my ringer, but somehow a telemarketer can still.
You're good.
Len Elmore and I were doing this game.
I like Len Elmore.
Indiana at Iowa. I'm sure it was a Super Tuesday game, so we're going to the shoot-arounds at Carver Hawkeye Arena. And Dr. Tom Davis is coach of Iowa. There's never been a nicer man in sports.
Yeah.
I mean, just genuine. Every time we'd come, he would bring us a gift bag. And he's not trying to suck up to us so we'll talk nice about him. That's how he was a good host. Welcome to Iowa City. And the little gift bag would be, the black and gold striped tie or a mug or something. So there's Dr. Tom Davis, and then there's Bobby Knight on the other end. And, before this, I'd done a number of Indiana games, and even with Dick Vitale, Dick would want to stick his head into his office before a game just to say hi, and he wasn't even really that friendly to Dick. So this shoot-around, we walk in, and players are already going through early shooting or whatever. No one's saying a word, not even his assistant coaches. And Bobby Knight is up in the stands reading a book about Ben Hogan. And he's not even paying attention to the court. So we walk through, and our table is on the other side of the floor. So it's Len, me, our producer, Roy Hamilton, who's an All-American at UCLA, played for the Pistons. He's producing for ESPN at this point, and the sports information director for Indiana, Greg Elkin. This is our routine. This is what we do. We sit down and we talk to the SID, and he's filling us in whatever tidbits might or might not be handy, and just catching up and just having a conversation while we're watching shoot around. And then once they get down to actually going over the game plan, then we're shutting up and we're really watching. And Len is looking for specifics that are above my pay grade, but it's something that he's going to talk about. Yeah, this is how they're approaching this pick and roll or whatever. So again, no one has said anything on the court. The players aren't even saying, hey, they're nothing. It's robotic. They're going through their layup line or whatever. Even the assistant coaches aren't saying anything. So that's the atmosphere. And Bobby Knight is way over on the other side of the floor. So at one point, Greg asks me something. And I turn, and I'm beginning to answer his question. And then all of a sudden, I see Greg do this. And then he jumps to his feet. And I'm still answering his question, and then I'm thinking, why is he all of a sudden looking freaked out? So then I turn, and practice had stopped, and here comes Bobby Knight thundering across the court, screaming at us. Somehow we've done something to piss him off. Although we're sitting there, and we're talking quietly enough that no one can hear us because it was such a quiet practice. If we talked in a normal tone of voice, it would have been the loudest thing in the building. So we're almost whispering. So, we're not being a distraction. But here comes Bobby Knight. And the closer he gets to us, I realize he's throwing us out of practice. So I look at the guys and go, what is happening here? And Len and Roy are putting their stuff in their briefcases and just shaking their heads. And Greg is saying, guys, you got to go. You got to go. Don't take it personally. He wants you out of here. Well, it's still not making any sense to me. So I look back, and here he comes. And he's got this big red sweater. He looks like a tomato that's spewing seeds everywhere. And I'm the only person making eye contact with him. So he focuses all his fury at me. And I'm not saying anything. I'm just still trying to make sense of this. What is it that he's screaming mad about?
And he's not afraid of cuss words, folks.
It's every word.
Oh, yeah.
So he gets about this close. I mean, not quite nose to nose. And I finally make out that he's accusing us of treating his practice like a GD picnic. So we're never invited to another of his practices ever again. So I'm looking at him at this point. I'm sure my facial expression is, you've got to be kidding me. What are you talking about? If I had said anything, that's what I would have said. What are you talking about? A picnic? We're doing our jobs. Your sports information director is doing his job. And we're not making any noise. We're just sitting here watching practice. So it's right at me. And I've turned his practice in GD picnic. And so, okay. Pick up my stuff. We walk out. Greg is trying to apologize as we're walking out. Apparently, he's kind of been thrown out, too.
What the heck?
And he's saying, don't take it personally. He's mad at the world, guys. He's mad at the world. So we get to the car, and Len is an attorney. Len is a Harvard-trained attorney.
Yeah.
So we go to lunch, and Len isn't saying anything, and we get to lunch, and Len says, we don't have to stand for this. That's unprofessional behavior. We're there because our company has purchased the rights to this event, and we don't have to take this. So he's kind of formulating a letter of protest he's going to send to our bosses, to the Indiana president and AD. So I find out later, once we get back at the arena for the game, Greg says he's just mad at the world because his team is underachieving. And so I said, so in other words, he used us to try and motivate his team. Because when I looked at the players while this is going on, they're all like that. Like,
I bet.
Why is he throwing out ESPN?
What in the world's
Those
going
guys
on?
didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So that made me lose all respect to this day for Bobby Knight.
I bet.
Really? That's how you motivate your team? You got to, find
Humiliate people?
Yeah, to shock them.
Yeah.
It's the hardest I've ever had to work not to cheer for or against a team on the air. We're all hoping Iowa wins just because of that, and Iowa does win. We're not letting that, out on the air. And later, I'm telling other people at ESPN this story, and it turns out everyone has a story like that.
Oh, I bet.
Vital says, I can't even begin to remember the number of times he's thrown me out of practice. Bill Raftery says, I've probably been thrown out of 15 practices. So it's like a regular thing with him. It's the only time I've ever been tossed for no reason whatsoever. Every once in a while, we might be asked to leave if they're going to, go over some secret play or whatever. But I've never been dealt with, and I thought that this was an experience unique to us, and it turns out it wasn't
not
unique
at all.
But it was unique to Len and Roy and me.
That's a fascinating story. You mentioned earlier the year number 1 with the Spurs. I think you said 21 wins. Then year number 2, 56 or 57. That's a huge turnaround. How cool has it been to watch another turnaround, a more local turnaround, the North Texas Mean Green basketball program? I'm a complete paradigm shift, which is mostly because of Grant. But how has that? How you've had a front row seat for that? How has that looked over the last 24 to 36 months?
I only knew of Grant because I had done some Baylor games for, when it was the Southwest Conference game of the week. And I just remember his name as being an end of the bench, walk-on type backup point guard. But I hadn't really followed his coaching career. And so when he was hired, at first it didn't seem like a natural hire until I looked into, what he'd accomplished, winning the junior college national championship at Midland and 1 year at Arkansas State and 20 wins. And so then, I see, well, he's had success everywhere. And the more I've gotten to know him and his staff and watch them operate, it's the opposite of Bobby Knight. We're welcome to everything they do, from meals to scouting reports to practices. I mean, the door's always open. And so what that means is we have been able to see up close exactly why he is successful. And the job he and his staff did this past year is the best coaching job I've ever seen in college basketball.
Wow.
Not just the game coaching, but to put together that roster. I doubt this is anything that can be researched, but this past North Texas team has to be the only team in the history of the NCAA tournament to have 3 starters who got 0 Division I offers out of high school.
Wow.
I mean, most teams that make the tournament, you can't find more than 2 guys who didn't get an offer. This is 3 starters who Grant or his assistants had identified at the junior college level, and they identified aspects of their game and their personality that they knew they could develop. And those were Javion Hamlet, who I think should be drafted in the NBA, and Thomas Bell and Marquez McBride, and all of them starters. The win over Purdue, they combined for 56 points.
Yeah.
So it's not just that Grant, is a good in-game coach. It's how he has come up with, the ability to identify the type of coach he wants on his staff and how they go about identifying talent and then bringing them in and developing them. So, as impressive as they were during games and as great as it was to watch them beat Purdue, I was not shocked at all. I fully expected them to.
Did you?
Absolutely, because the more researching Purdue, the only difference is they have higher profile players coming out of high school.
Yeah.
But they were not a better team, and Purdue led for like 45 seconds that entire game.
It got hairy with 3 or 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
And then
but even
North
in
Texas
overtime, they were going to win in overtime.
Yeah. They ran away in overtime. That was awesome.
Yeah, just
awesome
because
game.
he has coached them up so well as players and also as young men. I mean, this sounds like this can't really be sincere. Everybody says that. Well, everybody says, oh yeah, he's really great with the kids. I've never seen anybody better teaching young men about life as well as their sport than Grant. He is head and shoulders above anybody else.
Wow, that's high praise.
That. Yeah, so it was fun watching them succeed and knowing everything that those players put into it for them to make history like that. And those individual stories, I've never seen anybody more self-motivated than Javion Hamlet these last couple of years, just because he knew what he had in him and he wasn't going to get the opportunity. Well, he finally got the opportunity, and the whole country, got to see exactly what he was capable of.
Most definitely. How cool has it been for you in the last 10 years to see the strides that North Texas athletics has made? We've got the new Apogee Stadium. I bet North Texas football has a better year this year than they had last year. Was kind of a tough year. Luttrell, he's been looked at by other programs. Has it been cool to just watch it grow from where it was when you were a student and even when I was a student in the early 2000s to where it is now?
When I was a student, again, I'm spoiled by timing. Aiden Fry's the coach.
Yeah.
7 wins, 10 wins, 9 wins. So I thought, well, this is just who we are now. We're a 9 or 10 win team. That's what we're going to be every year. Well, he gets hired to turn around Iowa and did that. And it's until, the early years of Seth Luttrell, it's been that long before, back-to-back 9-win seasons. All these decades it took to get, the football program back to where Seth has had them, not this past year. So I was mistaken as a student thinking we're just always going to win 9 or 10 in football. We're always going to win 21 or 22 in basketball. Because that's, the immediate turnaround from Bill Blakely from 6 wins the year before he came to 22-4. And you come to appreciate how difficult it is to have even one season that good, much less string enough together that becomes the identity of the program. We all talk about as alums the advantages of being in such a recruiting-rich area as Dallas-Fort Worth. They used to not have anything comparable to big-time programs in terms of facilities. Now they can match, definitely anybody on their level, and a lot of Power 5 programs would love to have the facilities that North Texas has. So it's nice to see the potential of the university come to fruition, because those of us who've watched it our entire lives always thought that the school had it in them, but for whatever reason it just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening, and these last several years it has been happening. So that's great to see, and it's been a long wait.
Yeah.
So now that success is finally here, it's a lot of fun.
No doubt. What's up with the Iowa connection with North Texas? Because didn't Tom Davis help with the basketball coach search 2 basketball coaches ago? When I don't remember. When Johnny Jones left, and didn't he have a hand in Benford being hired, I thought? And didn't Hayden Fry help with the football coach search too?
Might have. I don't remember anything specific about it.
Yeah. Okay, so there's not like some hidden Iowa North Texas connection that I don't know about.
The connection was Iowa was smart enough to hire him.
Yeah. Right.
And Hayden brought a bunch of his staff. But no, I think it's just that.
Yeah.
I mean, that I'm aware of anyway.
You mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast that your dad was part of, or that you ended up down at Trinity because your dad was, is he a preacher?
Yeah, he was ordained Presbyterian minister, but never had a church. I mean, he was an associate pastor.
Gotcha.
But most of his career was spent in a position where he was in charge of education, like putting together what the Sunday school program for each age group was going to be, or whatever, or these classes adults will learn. He was not what most people think of when they think of a pastor. He wasn't up giving sermons every week.
Gotcha.
Because that wasn't he could have done that, but that's just not where.
Sure.
That's not
so
where he
you
spent his
grew up
career.
in the church?
Is
that a big part of your life? Are you a man of faith now?
Yeah. My mom still goes. She was the original organist. She met my dad when she was a student at North Texas and was the organist for the church, the one church where my dad was actually an associate.
Which church was that up in
St. Andrew Presbyterian.
That's crazy, because that's where my parents went when they lived here. So I've been there many times. And shoot, I might have crossed paths with you there at a Christmas program.
Maybe.
Or something.
Well, the story my mom still tells is the head pastor was named John Marvin, and she played for a wedding that he performed, and she went up to him afterward and said, "Reverend Marvin, I hope someday you can perform my wedding." I mean, my mom was like 19 or 20. And he says, "I'd be happy to. In fact, I'd like it to be to our associate pastor."
No kidding.
So
That's
put
awesome.
them together, and not long after that, he was actually performing. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
What role would you say that your faith plays in helping you live a fulfilled, balanced life?
I think perspective, because I think, it's as high as a high may be professionally, or as a low may be. I've never looked at it as a be all and end all. I look at it as I was given certain abilities. People probably call it a calling, and I've never had any doubt that this is what I'm supposed to do, because it's such a specific set of skills that doesn't transfer very many places.
Sure.
So, I've always been, pretty convinced that, okay, well, yeah, I am able to do things not everybody can do. So what's my response to that out of gratitude? Well, try and be as good as I can be, not take anything for granted. So no matter what is going on, for better or worse, that's always, been a factor that has allowed me to keep perspective.
Kind of like, just kind of like a North Star, like a guiding, kind of guiding.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. When you mentioned highs and lows, when adversity has presented itself. For instance, the whole thing that happened with the Rangers, where you had the migraine and the jumbled, garbled speech or whatever. When that whole thing went down, was that a pretty serious low for you on the back end of that after you got your tests back and all of that?
Yeah, because it turned out not to have been a migraine. That was the first guess, because I have, since I was 20, had migraines, and there was one Thanksgiving morning where I was doing morning sports at WBAP, and I had a migraine while I was on the air, and I had difficulty. It's called aphasia. You have difficulty saying what you're trying to say. The wiring gets scrambled in the speech part of your brain. This I knew was different because I knew I was struggling at the time it happened on the air at WBAP. I have no memory of those 20 seconds of that Ranger game. And in fact, I didn't know about it until the next morning.
Yeah, your wife told you.
She woke me up about 6:45 San Diego time and said, well, I guess you realize you're the only thing anybody's talking about here. I said, what are you talking about?
Huh.
What you said last night. It was a 2-1 game. What do you mean what I said? It was just a game. What are you talking about? What you said in the 8th inning. What are you talking about? And she tried to describe it, and I had no memory and still don't. And so I'm just thinking, well, how weird is that? Because, Tom Grieve and I walked back to the hotel after the game. He didn't say anything.
He didn't say anything?
Nobody in the truck said anything. What is she talking about?
Did Tom ask you about it the next day? No?
No. So at this point, I'm
Tom's
awake.
a pro. He's a big time
At this
pro.
point, well, I found out later it's because he wasn't listening to me.
Yeah.
And he told me there's
Sure.
lots of times I don't listen to you.
Yeah.
That was a particularly unfortunate time for him not to be listening. But so it's like 7 o'clock in San Diego now. So, okay, well, I guess I'm awake. So I turn on the TV, and Good Morning America comes on.
Another telemarketer?
Spam risk.
Well, there you go, man. Yeah.
So,
Somebody
Good
trying
Morning
to sell
America-
you auto maintenance.
Yeah. So Good Morning America comes on, which I'm usually not awake in time to watch, but
Sure.
I'm the third story.
Wow.
And they played the clip, and that's the first I knew what my wife was
Man.
talking about. And then they talked about it afterwards, and it's George Stephanopoulos and Robin Roberts, and George is saying, yeah, he pronounced all the words just right. They just didn't make sense in that combination. Well, I'd worked some with Robin at ESPN, and I was kind of wishing she would say, well, I've known Dave and worked with him. I don't know what this was, but that's very out of character. But so then phone calls start coming from my boss for the Rangers, John Blake, because now they're thinking, well, this is maybe a stroke. This is something medical, and we need to get you home and get some tests run. And so I flew home that day and started this series of tests. The original thought was migraine related, and that particularly is called a compound migraine, where there are other speech-oriented symptoms. But it didn't sound right to me because there were no other symptoms. It came and went in 20 seconds, and I don't remember it. So that's unlike any other migraine I've had. So then the testing was about, was it a stroke? Was it a TIA, transient ischemic attack, which is kind of like a mini stroke? Or is there something more serious going on that this might have been a symptom of a seizure? And the key was that I have no memory of it. So whatever happened in this temporary rewiring of the speech part of the brain doesn't imprint in the memory section of the brain. So that's how they were able to eliminate a lot of possibilities, like migraine. That was pretty much quickly dismissed. So then the testing was involved with, is this seizures? I had a bicycle accident and a concussion, actually a fractured skull not long before that. And so the thinking was, I didn't realize, but you can develop epilepsy from a head injury.
Really?
I thought epilepsy is something you're born with. So that became the focus, And so about 2 weeks or so after this, I expected to be sent home. If the tests show, okay, I don't have a brain tumor, I don't have a blood clot, so they'll put me back on the air. I think they weren't comfortable in putting me back on the air until there was a diagnosis. Because if it had happened again, I think the Rangers were wary of appearing callous. Like, well, obviously there's something seriously wrong. Why would they just run him back out there? I think they wanted to avoid that. So there was a weekend where I was going to be attached to sensors all over my head and studied at Parkland Hospital. It turns out there's a whole wing for epilepsy at Parkland, and they were going to watch my brain waves for 72 hours and see if there was any evidence that this had been a seizure. And so the first day goes by, the first night. Day 2 comes in, and one of the doctors says, we're going to let you go. This wasn't seizures. We're going to, well, there's lots of other things we can test you for, but it's not that. You don't have epilepsy. This wasn't a seizure. In the whole 6 months I ended up getting tested, he's the only doctor who had seen this before. And he said, we don't have a name for this. We don't specifically know what causes it. All we know is it doesn't happen again. So that was good news.
Yeah.
But it's also terrible news because it's not a diagnosis.
Right.
And because it never happens again, they'll never know what it is because you can't study it. It's just he says, what we chalk this up as, the term we use is medical anomaly, which means we don't know.
Yeah.
So this was in July, and I was really hoping, I mean, strange as it sounds, I was hoping that they would say, yeah, it's seizures and it's epilepsy, and here's, the medication or whatever. So he's good to go back on the air. But it wasn't that. And there were still other things to test. Well, at this point, it's a few weeks into how they had reconfigured the booth, and they had moved Steve Busby from being Eric Nadell's radio partner to my TV seat, which Steve had done before. And then they brought up Matt Hicks from Nolan Ryan's Corpus Christi minor league team. And he became, temporarily, it was thought, Eric's partner for radio. And more testing, and no, it's not that, it's not that. And this also happens to be the final year of my contract. And so by the end of that season, for all the things that have come together for me, this is the one time where everything worked against me in terms of timing. Ending the contract, Nolan was such a Matt Hicks fan, he was always hoping he could get a chance to make him a major league announcer. He'd been a long-time minor league announcer. And so he brought him up, and he just didn't want to send Matt back to the minor leagues. They were comfortable with Steve Busby doing TV, and so they just decided we're not going to reconfigure again. So this is what we're going with the next year. And so that's by far the most difficult thing I've had to deal with, partly because this had gone viral, and this was, for people who weren't aware of my career at all, this is all they knew of me. And I'm getting calls from the NBC Nightly News. They want to follow up with this. And I told them, I don't know what to tell you because I don't remember it. And nothing, has turned into a positive test. So what would you do with it? I don't want you to just play that 20 seconds again. It's already out there enough. So it became a catch-22 where I needed somehow to get on the air and show people I'm okay. And whatever this was, it was just 20 seconds out of 30-some-odd year career. But I couldn't get another opportunity until I got on the air. So it was a couple of years before I got that opportunity.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No kidding. What's that low like, and how do you keep your mindset from falling into that all too easy human reaction to adversity, which is that victim mindset where, oh, this happened to me and I don't think I deserve this and it's not fair. And I mean, how did you just keep plugging away, and what did you do for a couple years?
That's the thing. I couldn't plug away.
Yeah, I
had to get an opportunity. So that didn't come until spring of 2014. It was almost 2 years, and I'll always be thankful to Ed Pete, who was at Fox Sports Southwest, and at FS1 was doing a college baseball package, and Ed gave me the opportunity to do a 20-25 game package of college baseball, and a lot of it was national. So that's really what I needed to, show people. I don't have whatever you may fear it might have been. And, it wasn't Major League Baseball, but it was a network level broadcast. So what I had to deal with was the fact that there's a certain amount of randomness to this. And so many people have had far worse things happen. I'm alive. It wasn't painful. I don't have to have surgery or anything. But on the other hand, I've put in at that point 30-odd years into a career, and 20 seconds out of 30-some-odd years are, at this point, what most people around the country may know me for. So, that's what happened. So then the only thing I can control is how do I deal with it?
Yeah.
Once I got the opportunity, to resume my career, it wasn't at the same level, but it's doing what, I've always been convinced I was supposed to do. And so it's back same as when I was 23 years old. It's be as prepared as possible to do as good a job as I possibly can, and that's all I can control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, life is very random. And I guess every day we wake up, we should be grateful that we're waking up.
Yeah, so, if I'm going to be mad, well, who am I going to be mad at?
Yeah.
Well, the same
God,
the same entity who gave me this long string of incredibly good fortune.
Good point.
Well, if I'm going to be mad about this, then how am I supposed to look at, the things that have happened to me since 1978?
Most definitely. When COVID came on the scene last spring and everything came to a screeching halt sports-wise, do you think then, as well as maybe 9/11, we really saw how much we need sports and how much sports help our collective mindset to have them?
For some people, I'm sure, but I think it also showed us how we can survive without it.
Sure.
And that's not good for the industry of sports.
Right.
And it's not good for the industry of sports broadcasting, but, people found other things to do with their time. And some of them couldn't wait to come back once sports was back on TV, and some people probably will never come back.
They're gone for good.
Yeah.
What is you get a front row seat to a lot of this, and you just sung very high praise of Grant McCaslin at North Texas for being a leader of men and shaping these young guys into men. What is special about sports? Why are sports important? I mean, I've got my own opinions about it from years of coaching and playing, but when you've seen coaches from the Grants to the Bobby Knights, so different ends of the spectrum, what about sports are so important and so special?
Well, I think a lot of things, for those of us who play sports as kids, we just associate it with fun.
Right.
How many things are as fun in life as sports? I think we like the fact that it gives us identification. Now that's bled into realms where, we shouldn't approach it the way we do sports in the political realm. Now, believe it or not, this really is off.
You're good, man.
Ringer
no worries.
Really is off. But
dang
the spam
phones
risks find a way through.
They find their way through.
I don't think it's healthy as a society for everything to come down to loyalty to a team or a school or a brand or whatever.
Or a political party.
Yeah. But, that's kind of driving a big section of democracy now.
Mm-hmm.
It's, this is my team, and we can do no wrong, and the other guys can do no right, and that's it. Well, the democracy can't function like that. That's a fun element of sports, for you to be a UT fan and to dislike everything OU, but you can't run a country that way. You can't run a world that way. So, I think this has kind of driven that home. I think people like the fact that at the end of a sporting event, there is a result. There's a win, there's a loss, and you know what happened. You know where you stand. You can compare yourself or your team to everybody else that's out there and see exactly where you're better, where you're worse. There's always a ready measuring stick in sports. And it's something to look forwad to. It's seasonal. Human beings like seasons. So I like going from one season to another. That just kind of spices up, the rhythm of life. So I think it's all that. But I think mostly it's just fun.
It is. It is that, no doubt. If anybody watching wants to get in touch with you to MC an event or wants to hire you back at ESPN, how can they reach you?
How did you reach me?
I reached you through Facebook Messenger.
That worked for you, didn't it?
It did, yes.
Well, they should try that.
Okay. Dave, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you very much.
That
was awesome. That was great, man. That was fascinating. That was awesome. I don't think I've had a podcast that went an hour and 45 minutes, and it just flew by. Dave, really generous with his time and very insightful and thoughtful with his answers. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'd love to know what you think about the podcasts. I have a ton of fun putting them together and sitting down with fascinating people like Dave. But if you want to drop a comment below, I'd love to read that. You can also hit me anytime on Instagram at Jess from the Northwest, or if you'd like to work together, email me anytime live at autographconstruction.com. We'll see you next time.